on, everyone? Welcome to the Mission Driven Made podcast. I want to welcome Jeff Depatie to the show. Thanks for being on the show, sir.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure, and all the gratitude in the world for having me on.
Awesome. And I believe your last name is French. Is that correct? I'm sure I didn't say that right. Do you mind saying it for me?
Well, it's Depatie en français, and I say Depatie. I'm mostly an English speaker, so yeah, I say Depatie. It's a bit of a tricky one.
Do people say your last name wrong all the time?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a bit of a rare name too. But it's an old name, actually. Weirdly enough, I was reading something about it yesterday. Its lineage back in France, and it was like Forget de Depatie. It's like a place, I don't know, the French with their multiple names and stuff like that. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds sophisticated, but yeah, I just want to make sure that we said it correctly there. So thank you for that. And you are known for your time as a Tier 1 Special Forces sniper. But before we get into all of that, I kind of wanted to hear about everything pre-Special Forces. So if we can kind of start from your upbringing, and then we'll eventually work our way back to sitting here today. So if you don't mind kind of sharing with us a little bit about your upbringing and how that led you to the military.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I like this part. I get to I don't want to say reinvent it every time, but I always go for different angles. Like,
yeah,
life's complicated and a lot happens. So to sum it up in a few words can be a fun challenge. I was a Northern Ontario boy up here in Canada, which means to the left of me was bush and to the right of me was trees. And that was great. It allowed me some freedoms that potentially people don't get in a more metropolis setting, where at a very young age I got to adapt the explorer mentality. I've always, like, looking back now, I wouldn't have used those words as a child. I've always had that sense of exploration, adventure, so it allowed for that. And my parents, and I say this very intentionally, gave me boundaries without giving me boundaries. I think it's an important thing for children to feel safe, but also the ability to explore, right? That's mom and dad's job. That's your closest allies, your family, your immediate friends. That's their job, is to help you feel safe. So I had a lot of that in my childhood, which, got me out in the woods. I camping, hunting, fishing, all that jazz. My dad was big on that stuff. And, we nurtured that. Into adolescence, it took a vast turn. Interests changed. Peer pressures, in teenagehood led to drugs and alcohol. But the whole time there was this flavor of bushcraft, the military. Some call it the warrior spirit. I think it's a bit of it's missing a lot of its definition when I say warrior in there. I think warrior can look like a lot of things that don't necessarily mean violence and aggression. But yeah, drugs and alcohol, but there was always this tingling in the back of this military life, and managed to survive that. I don't know how, the old story, I got out of it alive and unscathed. A few trips or a few incidences with the law and stuff like that. Anyhow, did a bit of college time, got held back, and then I was a little bit later. So especially down in the US, people get into the military, I think, generally younger than they do here in Canada. And I was, by the time I ended up in there, I was 25. I had some family. My family needed some help working through some things with their businesses that held me up for a little while. But yeah, I started my training, signed up, and then my sister got married. And the next day I went off to boot camp and went through. So we do our boot camp in a place called Saint Jean, Quebec. It's actually the old Montreal Olympics. What do they call that? The athletes, wherever the athletes center, where they all stay. So they got all their training stuff there. It's just a huge, massive facility called the Mega. And, didn't have a clue what I was getting into, ironing and sewing and running everywhere and mop drills, that kind of stuff from basic. I was I was a little thrown. I was looking for something a little different, anyways, ended up in the infantry. I want to say suffered my way through, but like looking back, it's always with a smile. I use that word endearingly. Yeah. Anyhow, got into an airborne company. So we don't have airborne regiments like down in the US. We just, each of our infantry regiments has an airborne company. Each of the third, so we have our regiments, like the RCR has, 1, 2, 3. Same with the Pickleys and the Vandus out in Quebec. And in the third regiment in the battalion, there's a 1 jump company. So it's a pretty hot spot to get to. Anyways, got there, deployed to Afghanistan, spent about 9 months-ish there in Zangabad. I'm not sure. That's northeast of Kandahar, just along the Reg Desert, Arghandab River, that whole area, which was just a magnificent place in a lot of ways. I look back on that time very fondly, but I was very fortunate too. We had a really so it was 2008 by the time we got on the ground there. So the wars had been going on for a while. There was a lot of lessons learned. And I feel that was like a sweet spot where we'd adapted to a certain point, and the quote unquote enemy had adapted to a certain point, and it just made for really good fighting. And when I say fortunate, most of us got out without even minor injuries. A couple people got shot, but it's a very special place. I don't like calling it primitive because they're way more intelligent than that. They're just very in tune. There is some work to be done. Maybe not so much anymore. I don't know what the state of Afghanistan is now. It's been years since I even turned on the news or saw some kind of report on it. I hope they're doing well. Yeah, and then came back and got ready for selection. Pretty much, if I was to nutshell it all up, whatever that is, 5 years of life.
And I have tons of questions about where you just ended with your story right there, but I did want to kind of rewind a little bit and zoom into something that caught my attention. You said something about drugs and alcohol and going through that. So that's a very big part of my story as well. I had a heroin addiction problem when I was a teenager, and I had no idea that was in your background at all. So if you don't mind, don't need to go into, details or anything, but for you, what that time period was like, and then kind of what it took to move past that. Because normally, you don't see someone of your success or caliber that went through something like that, at least to that degree. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more people out there who are successful that go through and struggle with all kinds of demons. So I would like anyone who is kind of in that situation, just end the shame cycle right away. Just like a piece of advice, because I'm sure you experienced that. It's like,
oh yeah,
shame from the outside world, internal shame, and it just creates this feedback loop that really encourages the behavior more than sways you away from it. Well, for me, it started pretty young with things like marijuana and booze, but very young, preteen, and it was more like weekend warrior kind of stuff. Just I don't even know why. Like there was so much to do in life that just became a part of doing it as well. So at first, it wasn't. It wasn't bad, but it was way too young to be doing these kinds of things. Life it's complicated enough. You don't need to be a young preteen getting into this stuff. And it's not because my parents were negligent or anything like that. I would consider myself more, I was working around them. I had, I think, very good support. That's why early on, I mentioned those two things about boundaries and safety, because if parents do anything, is instill those two things: is the ability to explore boundaries, but also feel safe, and actually have some, because parents can't let kids run free. And the reason that's important is because I think it was a very big part of finding my way back home, if you will, on the other side. So it started young, and then it went in, and then it went into heavier things, and then it became more often. Eventually it gets to the point of drinking and drugs every day, especially as more designer chemicals come into the world. And then you're just mixing, and it just starts it's a spiral, right? It's a spiral that is very hard for people to break. I don't know. There's a few reasons people get into drug spirals. One is because they're running from something, so they want to numb themselves and not feel it. And I think the second, which is potentially more dangerous, is they want to raise their consciousness, if you will. They want to feel better in the world. It's not necessarily they're running from something, or they just, some drugs feel like a elevated state of consciousness for a while. And then what happens is you get addicted to that chase of that. Then okay, well, this one's not working anymore. I got to go down this road more. Fortunately, I had many not fortunately that I did, but I had many run-ins with the law that my first time getting arrested, I was 12. It was for stealing. I look back, I'm such a chump, and my Guns N' Roses t-shirt on. I thought I was so badass. And then those kinds of things happen. But fortunately, I never hurt other people. I was only destructive to myself for some reason. I think sometimes I wonder if people seek out suffering, because I think our bodies are really designed. And like I said, I use the word suffering lovingly. I think we're designed to be in those proper stripes through life, and I came from a family that had really none of that at that time, my teenage life. And then, compound on that, all the teenage jazz that comes with it. And then it shows up differently. If you're 35, it's other pressures that bring you into this. Anyhow, I was fortunate with the arrest that I never destroyed my future, but somewhere around, well, would have been I think it was my 19th birthday. Can't remember if it was my 19th or 18th, but I'm like locked up, talking through the glass to my mom in the orange jumpsuit. And, I have a high IQ. I'm an intelligent person. I was blessed with, fast reaction times, good hand-eye coordination. I came from an upper middle class family, and here I am, wasting away my life. And there was just something about the deep disappointment in my mom's eyes that was, for me, that was the gap. That was that moment of like, oh, okay, I gotta start peeling myself out of this. I'm what they call an INTJ in the MBTI, introverted, intuitive, whatever, thinking, judging. That's what I tend towards. I move through the lettering. But the reason I mention that is because INTJs, INTPs, anyone who's like that INT combo, introverted and deeply thinking, tend to go deeply inwards. And they're at a higher risk potentially. So studies are showing of things like depression, but not seeking out help. That's the big one. So I was that kind of person. I don't know if I was probably too stubborn, too much ego to seek out help, which would have helped. I was lucky that I naturally had it in my family structure, and my friends were pretty decent. I did obviously have to change that environment a little bit and move away from some of the people who were adding to that, but it was a slow process out. It wasn't overnight success. At this point, take away the potential for chemical addictions, you have habitual conditioning now you got to undo, right? Years of behavioral patterns that need to be reversed with new behaviors. And part of that, though, was getting back into being serious about the military. So that's when that's when I went into training, physical movement. Those are some things that are, I'm going to use the word easy button, but basic Maslow's hierarchy. If you're in an addiction cycle, take a look at that hierarchy and try to at least get the bases good, because you need to move. You need good nutrition to rebuild your brain cells, to have strength, to be hormonally balanced. So you don't, when you fall into holes, you don't need to reach for something outside of it. I would love to be able to give some kind of magical whatever, but I know as a child, I was given tools to deal with the underworld. And as a teenager, the same thing. And when it came really bad, when it became a daily cycle, I was fortunate. And, you know, if people are on the outside and they're looking into people with addictions, obviously it's easy when you start seeing them not going to work or whatever, the really obvious stuff. But if you start seeing isolation or degradation of their body, their mind, that's when it's time to say something to someone.
And that moment you're talking about, looking through the glass and talking to your mom, was that kind of your, I mean, kind of cliche, but was that like a rock bottom moment for you where you knew you had to change, and that's when it kind of all hit you? Or did you have a bunch of those situations?
I would like to think, and I wear it as a badge, that I've hit rock bottom in different ways many times for different reasons. Because I don't necessarily think going to the bottom is always bad. I think you can do bad things there for sure. But it also teaches you things. And that's the tricky part, right? Is incorporating all your experiences into either your reality, or more importantly, changing your reality to incorporate these experiences and take what's good out of there. So it was a rock bottom, certainly. And you probably mentioned this because rock bottom is actually important, because if people are on the descent and you see this, you're like, oh man, Jimmy's on the way down. We'll use a very prolific example, just got out of the military, maybe some kind of combat arms. It's got a little touch of PTSD potentially. It's got no real identity without the military. You start seeing them go down. It can be hard to stop that person on their way down, because the ego is a trickster in some ways, right? It protects. It's like,
Right.
no, my behavior's fine. My behavior's fine. So you may try to get there, but sometimes it takes rock bottom for someone to be like, oh, yeah, I see it now. Unfortunately, I think in some ways, I don't think you always have to go there, but it
Yeah.
can be tricky to stop someone on the descent. So
Right.
yeah, in a nutshell, it was definitely a rock bottom.
And were you concerned at all? Because I know you said the military's or on the back of your mind, that was going to affect getting into the military. And I ask because for me, kind of in my, I guess, later stages of addiction and later teenage years, being in the special forces, that was like, one of my dreams. But I got in trouble so many times, and in trouble with the law so many times, it would have required about 20 different waivers for me to get in. So all the recruiters I talked to said absolutely not. So did you worry or have to go through a lot of that to get into the military?
Yeah, there were some things that I was pardoned for, got pardons for it. As I said, though, there was nothing that was like, use the word sinister on the list. I think it's one thing to beat up yourself, and throw yourself into those holes. It's another thing to do it on purpose to other people, which does happen. But I was fortunate when it came to going to the SF at the time. There was, and I wasn't privy to these kinds of these lists, but there was like, yeah, broken criminal record doesn't matter, depending on what.
Got it.
Now that's gone. I think that's unfortunate. I think that's unfortunate, because I think I was an excellent operator. And if my criminal record didn't allow me in there, who knows what would happen? Because now at this point, that had become a pursuit, a dream of mine.
Yeah.
And, shattered dreams are never fun. I'd like to believe I would have found a way around it and, the silver lining, but it just kind of compounds that problem that
Yeah.
I was a teenager, man. What did I know?
Yeah.
I wasn't a perfect follower. That made me a really know, operator too, though. I could work independently. I could think outside the box. I wasn't scared of the unknown because that was my upbringing.
Right. Right. Well, I'm glad that's, how it worked where you are in your situation. I told a lot of people, I was in the fire and EMS for about 10 years, and getting into that career for me, I was a little bit worried because of my background. There's a lot of fire departments that don't take people that had too many speeding tickets when they were teenagers. And that's something I never really understood, especially the type of job. And it's even more enhanced if you're a special operator versus the fire department. But the type of people you're looking for aren't going to necessarily be I don't want to say ones that didn't behave growing up, but maybe ones that got into certain things. So I just never understood how certain agencies or departments could say no to people just because they made mistakes like that when they're teenagers. So it's just something I never really understood.
Yeah, they seek high conscientiousness. Lots of these organizations, it's probably on like a big 5-factor model. The ability, obviously these things have a lot of definition in psychology, a lot of things can be checkbox, but like basically they really look for the go do this and person gets it done. Go do this and the person gets it done. Follow these instructions. Don't move out of this box.
Yeah.
And then at some point we're going to ask you to move out of that box and just to come up with ideas. Anyways, that's why they seek that kind of behavior. And, obviously, I don't even know why I say it. You and I are not sitting here advocating for teenage alcohol and drug abuse.
Oh yeah.
Where,
not at all.
like there is another option you can do, which like our program, the process we've started dabbling with is, you do intentionally difficult things, things that can bring on similar levels of trauma. Boot camps do this. I don't know what the equivalent in fire, but like those, they're almost like crucibles, right? They're meant to compress and shape your behavior for, I believe, a healthy cause, firefighting, EMS style stuff or military. I still haven't denounced the military. I sit on this side of the scales of justice and wonder sometimes, of course.
Yeah.
But the world still has some tidying up to do and still needs some protecting, unfortunately. So yeah, they seek that on purpose. I think they limit themselves big times, because if you look at most of the hugely successful out of the box thinkers, they're high in that conscientiousness to their own degree. Because I think you can go too high, and if you go right to 100, I think you're a follower. That's what I think. I think you're just a drone, so you need a special blend in there. And they're at the point now, there's so many people, there's so much competition for jobs that they can start doing that, right? Oh, okay, now we'll whittle it down a little more. Oh, now you got to be this. And I wonder what the long-term impacts of that, just kind of, existentially. But same thing. It's a funny, like, where's the compassion, the forgiveness, the real forgiveness. We're finding that we're doing a documentary on post-traumatic growth, which is the other side of PTSD. And compassion and forgiveness it sounds really easy. It sounds really great. It sounds like everyone should be doing it, but people don't. They don't know how. There's such constructs in the brain that create us and them that it's difficult. I've had moments where I'm like, oh no, step back, think it through, and that compassion and forgiveness goes a long way. We work with people with addictions, extreme stress, burnouts, combinations. Usually there's a combination of it. And that's a big part of it. We talked about it early on, don't perpetuate the shame cycle. They're gonna do that enough themselves, and no one outside needs to do that. We need to be held accountable for our actions, of course, but a little bit of Christ-like consciousness goes a long way.
I love that. 100,000%. And I want to fast forward back to basic for you before we get into special forces. Was there anything during basic training that was, I guess you could say, very challenging for you, or maybe made you feel like you want to quit or anything like that? Or just how was it generally speaking for you going through that?
Well, the first hurdle that my first wife, when I left to go to basic, that was challenging. That moment was very challenging. It took some time for me to fully dawn on what was really happening in the scheme of our relationship there. but that was difficult. That the whole idea of becoming, how do I say it? You know, I don't want to say mistress to or the military is another mistress, but the identity started to separate there, and that was challenging. That was so that was the first kind of like, whoa, big hurdle that some people should expect when they do these kinds of things. If you don't feel any solace or whatever, not regret, but sadness when you're doing that, maybe you need to rethink your relationship, or you're just really good at it. So that was the first one. Inside of it, there was, of course, I had expectations. Nowadays I try to live with a little bit less expectations and more intention, because when you have expectations, they're bound to be just let down. They're bound to change. And I had this one vision growing up watching Commando and Rambo and all the boys. And then I get in there, and, like I said, ironing clothes and sewing on patches and picking up dust and stuff. Like I get it, it's a great form of behavior change to make someone more disciplined. It really does. It probably elevates the prefrontal cortex massively to get you into a certain position. It also does what it's supposed to do, which is, I don't want to say box you up, but become you a tool, move you into being a tool for the government. And I don't use tool like negatively. It's amoral, the word tool in this circumstance. So that was a little bit challenging. The expectation of one thing, like how it was going to look, and then the reality of it not looking that way. But that's a good lesson in life anyways, where most things on the journey of life are not going to look like you planned, and that's okay.
So true.
Yeah, the lemons lemonade kind of thing.
Yeah.
As far as difficult within it, I was pretty good shooter. I was good at all the obstacles course stuff. I was good on a team. I actually had, when I was a child, asthma, and it took a long time. It took years for me to develop really good long distance running lungs. So that was a little bit more challenging. I was still good. I could still keep up. There was none of that. It just, for me, I was like, I wish that was a little easier for me. But again, not a big deal. And over the years and years and years of running and training, now I have no issues with it. That took a little bit of time, probably some smoke damage from, years of damaging it with smoke. Here's another one. And it's funny because there was no, when it comes to innate or behavioral phobias, things like that, I don't really have any issues. I consider myself pretty emotionally stable in those platforms. I mentioned my sister's wedding. So she literally got married and then I drove to basic training, or I drove and then flew to basic training, sorry. Which moved me from a full-on infantry course. So in basic training, if they'll put all combat arms together, and especially all infantry, before you go to your battle school. I was scheduled to be on one of those, but because I needed to, I wanted to go to my sister's wedding, it pushed it a little bit to the right. And that moved me onto a mixed course of men and women. And our course had the highest age average ever running through basic training. So there was one dude, he was like 56.
Oh, wow.
And there was more women than there was men. And there was only myself and one other infanteer who, oddly enough, became a tier 1 operator and was in my squadron. But everyone else was like cooks and stewards and all kinds of things. And that was interesting too, because everyone gets into the military for a different reason, and everyone's hard charging to a certain limit. Like these older ladies, they're not there to be charging into battle. So managing around that, like all these things were pro and con. I got to understand working with my expectations, but people who were completely there for different reasons than me. But that at first that was a bit challenging, because I was still younger, a little bit more hot-headed. There was that. Yeah, in basic, I'll be honest with you. Oh yeah, you know what? like as far as like a simple one, staying awake. Just
Ooh.
I
Oh
remember
yeah.
one day I'm sitting in one of the like kind of amphitheater classes. I have a pencil. I'm holding it like this because I'm so tired, and it's on my desk, and it's like leaning in front of me, and I'm like, drooling and bobbing, and I'm like, what the, why am I holding my pencil like this? And wake up, yeah, staying awake. That physically, that was because it's whatever it's up to now, 13, 14, 15 weeks. It's exhausting. Whatever it is, 11, probably past 11, get up at 5 or whatever it is every day for weeks on end. And you're going, you're moving, and you're outputting, you're mentally, psychologically outputting. So yeah, the fatigue, that was a physically demanding one.
Did they go back and forth having you like in the classroom to learn all the didactic stuff and then out and doing physical stuff? Did it go back and forth like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was like military explain, demonstrate, imitate. Explain in the class, they demonstrate, and then you go imitate it. I wasn't perfectly like that, but
Yeah.
Pretty much like that, where yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, those classes, oh boy, thinking back to them. And like, I'll be honest here, I'm not gonna lie, most of them are so fucking boring. Like,
Yeah.
I try to be in there and interested, but it's like, no, this is not
Yeah.
brushing my teeth 101 is not riveting me today.
In our fire academy, we get there at like 5 a.m. In the first couple of weeks, it was just PT and classroom. We weren't learning any skills yet. So we PT really hard for, an hour. And then we go right to the classroom, and you look to your left and right, and people were bobbing their heads and falling asleep. And so we kind of went through a similar thing. So it was funny when you said you saw people dropping their pencils and everything. And so you go to basic, you're successful there. Did you already know at that moment or that time that you wanted to be part of JTF2? Was that already on the radar?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to be part of that, whatever that was, that level of smaller group entity, high paced, more risk, more reward kind of unit. The issue was that JTF2 didn't become public in any way for a long time. Like I remember going into the recruiting center at, so there's about 5 years of me in and out of recruiting because I said a few things. Well, one, I had my paperwork in to go to the U.S. military because I didn't know Canada had any unit like this. So I was, full on, and then 9/11 stopped my paperwork. So that was one thing, and then going into the few other things. But I remember going into the room with the recruiter, and she like closed the door like it was all a big secret, and she's like reading to me about this unit. I was like, why does it take a closed door at the recruiting place for people to know about this? I get it, clandestine, the unit needs, because we do more national level stuff within the country. So there's things like that change that, but you can still know it exists, for young men and women who are interested in that next thing. So anyways, the second I found out it existed, I was like, yeah, that's where I'm going. And through basic, I knew it. I was pestering the leadership, like, yeah, this is where I want to go. And they're all like, oh, okay, guy, get through this here. You can't even iron your clothes. You know what I mean? Like there's a long road to go. I just sign me up, coach. I'm ready, put me in. But yeah, I knew that there was a few years you got to do in the Army before you can do that. So I kept pushing along. And then, once I was in the regular Army, did a tour there that postponed it for a little bit, but I absolutely loved. So it was very much the right thing to do. It made me a better soldier, made me a better person, understand combat much more. The amount of like combat experience we had in one tour, I think, was really, really epic. And so yeah, the whole time that was the point B on that path.
And for people that don't know, do you mind giving a basic summary of what JTF2 is? And is that kind of, would you say, the equivalent of like SEAL Team 6 in the US?
Yeah. See, I got to watch what I say, because if I say, yeah, it's like SEAL Team 6, all the 6 guys are, whatever. So SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force are tier 1 American units. And in that, we're similar. We're a tier 1 unit, funding, all that kind of stuff. Those are some of the boys we work with. Awesome dudes. I would say it's a little bit different. Like I said, there's a little bit more in the country that we do. We inherited our role from the police, from the RCMP. They had an awesome unit, CERT unit, and it was the counterterrorism unit. And we adopted it from them, and then changed it, and then made it more expeditionary outside the country. As of now, I can't put my hand on our heart, because some things were changing, but there was we took care of the maritime counterterrorism. We took care of all those threats, which thinned us out hugely, where in the US, the SEALs handle the sea more than Delta does, kind of thing, so there's a little bit of that going on. I would say it also has, if I'm relating to American stuff, FBI, HRT style flavors. We're very fortunate. We got great allies that we get to work with, and we get to, okay, as we continue to develop, because these units, they're not write out the mission statement once and that's where it is forever. You know what I mean? They're constantly evolving, adapting to the changes. I was thinking about that today. I was like, yeah, the concept of was an operator, you're out of the loop for a month, you're behind the curve huge. You go like me, 3 years out of there, I don't even know what they're doing. I can only hope and imagine that pace, that it changes, you know what I mean? So in a nutshell, yeah, something like that. But with our own unique flavors, just from where we cultured, taken over from the police force, and being Canadian, and the domestic stuff.
And what was selection like for you?
It's a bit mind bending. It's an awesome shift of reality. Obviously difficult, no duh. It was the length of it. For us, the initial selection starts on paperwork with the psychologist, and then the next portion is like a week-long kind of Hell Week style thing. And then you move from there into your 10-month operator course. But you got to meet the checks in the box. And that was when it really got they're just grinding you down. It's not grinding you down from at this point, the only PT you do is what you do. You're meant to take care of your own body, mind, and soul at this point. But it's just so much information. It's so much skill load. The amount of just insertion techniques you need to know, the amount of information that you have to be able to produce high level. Everything is just so much. The idea is you curve up so that once you kind of get to your normal, it's down here, but that normal is still super high. You know what I mean? But getting up to that peak is, climbing all peaks, it's difficult. And it's just the amount of we're doing this for 10 months and there's constantly chops. But it's awesome. It's got its rewards.